see a built-in counter right here, from here to there. It goes out just 18 inches from the wall, so we don't have to, like,
Yeah, it has
this
a
is
little...
wasted space.
Yeah, agreed.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going okay. How are you?
Good. Remind me, are you Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Tim. And then, I remember because you send the emails about the lab.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I often can't attend to the labs, and I just do all this stuff to set it up. So I have this like picture of me that's just floating around, but no one actually knows who I am. So what course are you going to be teaching?
It's going to be music history for undergraduates in music performance majors.
Oh, that's right. You did mention that yesterday.
So it's like 2 years of history, starting from really, really old ancient stuff, like ancient Greece.
Oh, gosh.
And then it finishes at 20th century.
Well, that'll be fun.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about super, super old music, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's how you learn it. You have to teach it and figure it out.
I have a friend who did it last year. They're like, yeah, do you know a lot about chant? It's like, not really. I don't know what chant is. It's like what monks used to do.
Yeah.
Have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Yeah.
There's chant in them.
I do remember my freshman year of college, I took like the introductory music class because it satisfied some requirement, and I thought it would be easy. And it was one of the hardest classes.
Oh my gosh.
Just because it was all like history stuff.
Right.
Something I hadn't really
Haven't really
known about.
Yeah, you didn't have much to reference to go off of. Yeah. What are you doing here?
I am in the physical therapy program.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, I just had my last final today.
Congrats.
That's exciting. Yeah, thank you.
Congrats. Great. How did it go?
It went well. Good enough.
Good enough.
Yeah. And then we have 3 more weeks of coursework in the summer, and then we're out on clinicals for the rest of the time. So that's really exciting.
That's cool.
I'm kind of saturated in terms of my classroom learning.
I see. What kind of physical therapy are you interested in doing?
I thought I might have a better idea after 2 years of school, but I think I'm more interested in being in a collaborative, team-based environment versus like hospital or outpatient or something like that. So
Cool.
Yeah.
That's neat. Like a team therapy? Is there such a...
Well, just like a workplace environment where you can bounce ideas off of each other and kind of push each other to develop professionally versus just kind of working on my own.
Yeah. I can see that.
I just think it's more fun that way. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm sure there's got to be all kinds of different groups that have like different formats of service like this.
Yeah. So we'll see.
We'll see.
I think actually one of my instructors is signed up to come today. So
Oh,
we'll see if she does
fun.
come. Yeah.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. Crazy weather today. Got me a little flustered because I was biking all around.
Yeah. Has it been steady or has it been coming and going?
Coming and going. So just you kind of peek out the window when it dies down, and then you like make a run for it.
And you make it halfway to where you're going and then you get slobbered on? Hey, Blair?
Hi. No. Have a good section.
Thank you.
I was reading the handout. It looks really interesting today.
Well, this is just half of it.
Okay.
The other half you've got to go and join our course for.
So how much autonomy do you get over the course you're teaching? Like, are you in charge of the Canvas site and all that stuff? Or that's a
I
good
don't know.
question to ask.
That's a good question to ask. I think that this course that I'll be doing has already been taught for a while,
Yeah.
and primarily I'm supposed to guide the students in discussion. I think that's the main thing.
Oh, the fun part. That would be good.
Is that the fun part?
I think so.
It can be.
Okay.
If they discuss.
Right.
If they don't discuss, it's the most frustrating part.
Right. So, Mr. Martin, how did you end up teaching this lab? Were you doing this before you came here, or were you doing other stuff?
So I got my PhD in curriculum and instruction here on campus. So that was looking at learning in video games.
Oh, cool. How interesting.
And I did a lot of mobile learning. So once the iPhone came out with the GPS, video games became interesting to me at that point. Because initially I had this perspective, perhaps wrongly, of video games as the kind of thing that you do in your basement with the windows closed because you don't want the glare, etc. And you do it sort of as a solitary thing. And certainly when I started it, the collaborative multiplayer games were not a big thing. So I was kind of like, I'm much more of a social person and much more of a situated person. I've helped run this wilderness camp for the last for 23 years. Not last year, the year before because it closed, but so it's very much about nature and experience and learning in place and things like that. And then with the GPS stuff, it was
you didn't miss the rain.
I can start to have some video games, but in actual places, which makes it kind of an interesting thing. I got a job here, and have been consulting with faculty about their teaching, so I took a lot of that. How can you make it more experiential? How can you get more people involved talking with each other? And 4 or 5 years ago now, the faculty engagement service was created with the new AT, and it became a how are we going to engage faculty in teaching their courses, but instead of just one-to-one consulting, we had to figure out a way to do multiple folks. So we said, let's have them talk to each other and learn from each other, because then we'll learn a lot more too, because, you know, as I always say, I've never taught a wet lab, I've never taught a 500-person lecture, but we have people on campus who struggle with these situations all the time. So let's get them in a room and talk to each other. And it's worked out pretty well. Colleen! How are you?
Hey. Good, how are you?
Good.
Miss Jennifer.
How are you?
I'm well, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Are you finished?
Yeah, I finished this morning.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm excited to go home tonight and not study.
It's
I don't know what I'm gonna do, but it's gonna be great.
But that's just the thing, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah. Did you mute everything?
Hey, hello, I
Not
made it back.
yet.
Oh, great.
puppies. I might go home afterwards and play with puppies.
There you go.
That would be good therapy.
Yes, at this point. All right, I will now mute my screen as no. Not that
Oh, you're kind of wet today.
You're gonna have the right equipment. You need to have the right equipment.
Yeah, that's right, you need a real poncho, reading poncho.
How far is your ride?
Oh, it's not far at all, it's by the stadium.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
But I guess-
it's pouring rain.
Yeah,
right,
it just
right,
takes
right.
a couple seconds and it
Just
doesn't matter how
block
far
and a
it
half to
is.
get here, I guess, so.
Sure, I'm glad you made it. John.
All right, thanks for getting back to me.
Yeah. I realized that I'd started to send you a final thing, but then it got lost behind another window, so I didn't send it till like right before the
No worries, I got it.
I'm so sorry.
Oh,
I
no.
keep like,
It's okay. This is a very narrow corridor here, so.
I think I'm actually bigger than I think I am, you know?
I think that those chairs appeared after the last session, right? After we left yesterday.
So I'm just gonna stay here.
Yeah, you look like they had a lot more
No,
people here.
I won't.
Anymore?
And then I took them out because I had the garbage there, but then we relocated the garbage, so I should have just come back. For this huge crowd. But it is a good option if people don't bring out a camera.
Right, that's true. Let's go ahead and get started because it is 1 o'clock. So, hello, welcome to the Active Teaching Lab. We were doing a series for focusing somewhat on Canvas and redesign and sort of these few weeks after the semester ends, and it's officially ended, congratulations everyone. We try to provide opportunities for people to reflect on their courses. So, I'm going to do all the way back to the end.
Thank you.
So we're holding these 4 teaching effectively in Canvas things where first, yesterday we did analyzing your course. Today we're going to talk about redesigning the course. Next Tuesday, building feedback into the course. And then next Wednesday we'll go back and hit a lot of tips on, and that's going to be like probably the most technical one of how to do all of these things we've been talking about. Let's see. Back to the beginning. So the Teaching Academy and Good Academic Technology got together several years ago and said, why don't we just have instructors tell each other what they do rather than having an instructional technologist interpret it and say, well, I seem to remember hearing something about so-and-so doing something else. We are very good at that, but we've actually never taught, most of us never taught a 500-person lecture or a wet lab course or a law course with the Socratic method or whatever. So we have secondhand knowledge but never have the first-hand knowledge, so let's just get people with first-hand knowledge in and facilitate discussions. Because we're doing academic technology, they're all having to do with some sort of technology, using technology to scale up what one does, how do we do it better by having things online, etc. So we've done now 186 labs with over 2,800 participants. It's kind of fun. We also create online videos of these labs. So if you can't make it, or if you hear something that you're like, oh, my colleague should hear this, we've got now all kinds of videos online of these things that you can share back at. As with many programs on campus, we get our bread and butter based on how many people show up. So thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing your buddy, if you bring your buddy, or tell your buddy about it. And another way that we justify our existence is through qualitative data and some quantitative data. So on your way out, if you could just check a couple of boxes, that would be super helpful for us. As sort of a public announcement, if you're still learning Canvas, UW Milwaukee is transitioning over to Canvas, and every Wednesday morning, I should take the slide off because they're done now as well, so I don't know if it's happening during the summer. Anyway, they've started an active teaching lab too. It's kind of exciting. In the fall, I teach for the Delta program, leveraging technology to learn, or tech to learn. And it's a program that's open, it's designed specifically, primarily I should say, for graduate students, but I've had instructors, instructional staff, tenured faculty taken in the past, and it's, the more people that we have in the class, the better the discussions. The goal of this class, the final project, is to design a Canvas course that one, as a graduate student, can take with them on the job hunt, so they can say, yes, I've thought deeply about pedagogy. Many of our students have never had a chance to teach, so they don't have anything to bring with them. And this way they have something to bring with them. They have that, at least some experience and a way to show evidence that they thought deeply about stuff. So in our typical labs, then, what we do is we start off with who are we and why are we here. And the reason we do this is so that during the next hour we can become very responsive to your particular questions and interests, so that you can't leave saying, I sat through this whole thing and I didn't learn a thing that I wanted to learn. They kept talking about all of these other things. So this helps me keep track of what it is that we should address. These teaching effectively in Canvas labs will also have some sort of an agenda to them that we're going to try to have as a structure. I should say that, we have this activity sheets. And these activity sheets with the green bar on top, at the very top, you've got instructions to get online into our Canvas course, where you will find this activity sheet. And I really want to emphasize and point this out because the conversation will be pretty wide-ranging. And we have a good structure for a lot of what we're going to be talking about on the activity sheet. But the activity sheet is more than 2 pages long. It's more than front and back. It continues online a lot farther. And so we just gave you the first page as sort of a teaser so that you will find that course. And join in it, because the online version, the digital handout, is a lot better. We've got links that work, the paper links. You can click on them all you want. You won't find any more information.
What's the quickest way to get there?
The quickest way to get there is canvas.wisc.edu, enroll, and then that number that's right on the top of the thing. And it should be on your activity sheet that you have here. Right there.
Thanks.
Right there. So because we're going to be talking about your interests, if there are things that we miss or that you wish we'd spend more time on, hopefully some of it will be here, and the rest of it we can spend more time on your interests. So my name's John Martin. Thank you for coming, and I would say that for redesigning your course, in the past, the learning management system, well, one, it's sort of a new thing. And when it first rolled out, people used it for the gradebook, and they used it to hold readings. So you'd upload a PDF of a reading, and maybe there'd be a PDF of the syllabus or a Word doc of your syllabus. And it was just a repository that students could go to on the computers and download things that they can refer to and use along with their textbook. Canvas has changed a lot of that because it allows for interactions between students. You can have quizzes with feedback. You can have the discussions. You can have people turn in their assignments. A lot more happens through this as a hub than it used to. So as we've redesigned this, because it's more complicated, it's also much easier to get lost in things. So do I have the assignments visible? Which of the assignments is the student supposed to go to? It's much more important now for us as instructors to help students go through this very clearly and guide them through it in some ways. But there are also things that are deeper topics for that. They're the pedagogical elements of that. So I can design a space, but if I haven't thought deeply about what it is that I want the students to do, if I haven't thought about the outcomes that I want them to achieve by the end of the class, I'm just organizing things willy-nilly and not based on what they need to get out of that. So that's my interest on why I'm interested in this topic of redesigning the course. Who would like to go next and talk about what they'd like to get out of today? Any questions that you might have? Jennifer?
Sure, I can start. I'm Jennifer. I'm a grad student in physical therapy and a project assistant here with the Active Teaching Lab. And I'm interested in, one, the challenges now that Canvas has kind of been around for a little bit, the challenges people are having with presenting information, and then also how design affects how students are learning, like what they're prioritizing and how they're like seeing the relationship in content. I don't know how you put that in one little bullet point.
I'm going to put it as design and wayfinding
Yeah.
for students. Excellent. Colleen?
So just to confirm that everything we say in there here stays in here, right?
Except for what's being broadcast live right now
Just
to our
teasing.
millions of viewers.
So I think part of the reason that I came today was looking at Canvas as being more interactive in my courses. I find Canvas, as you kind of spoke to, is just a platform for information, but I want to discover ways that are just more interactive for the students, that they find value in it.
Repository should be a better word than archive, but it's too long to write. Tim?
Oh, I'm Tim. I'm going to be TAing in music next semester, and I don't have any experience designing a course, so I'm just here to learn about your experience in designing and how you iterate it. I was looking at the handout and I thought these are really good topics. Really excited to go.
You've had experience as a student in Canvas, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you have probably actually have seen more varieties of courses than maybe all of us put together.
Maybe.
So do you have ones that you preferred over other designs in Canvas?
Yeah, I think, what was your name?
Colleen.
What Colleen was saying about providing value and interaction on the canvas, that definitely is much better than just making it like a dump of a Dropbox basically full of documents to read.
Okay.
Because then it's just like, oh, it's a file folder, and but I guess if there's some positive interaction with the professor or feedback, then it's kind of like, because nowadays students are so used to interacting digitally with people. So that's a way for them to connect with you as a teacher, and I think that's really cool. So yeah, that's my
Good.
experience definitely.
So another check for
Yeah.
for the interaction.
And also, I mentioned at our last lab how I used to work at this iPhone game company, and that's like what it's totally about is how can you get the student to interact with the software and interact with other players and also with moderators too. It's like, that's kind of, that's what the apps are all about now. Sorry, that was a little rambling.
User design for engagement is what I'm writing down. Does that make it?
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Dustin.
Okay, I'm a faculty emeritus from Agricultural Studies, and I'm interested in exactly what you're talking about, the engagement and the interaction. And I see a lot of friends, for example, in Indonesia who are trying to learn English, posting things, and they're very active. So that something like that could be maybe streamlined in this kind of platform.
Very good. Margaret?
Hey, Margaret, I'm a student at the high school and work here with John in the active teaching lab and Jennifer. And I'm interested in this idea of problem-based learning where the students are, I think you mentioned it, where you empower the learners to explore problem solving. And so I think that's something that I've seen approached different ways with different people, and I think just sharing best practices can lead to better outcomes.
All right, excellent. And Jim?
I'm Jim. I'm a faculty associate in forest and wildlife ecology, and I'm in the early stages of taking a large lecture course that I currently teach in the fall and converting it into an online course, and which I hope to offer by next summer. And I use Canvas. I use it for all my courses, but I don't think I use a lot of the features. Like you said, I mostly use it as just an information sharing forum. I post readings, I post my lecture slides, I have them turn in their assignments at Canvas, but I haven't used the more interactive features. My one concern is I'm teaching this course still as a large lecture course this fall, and I'd like to try out some of these features. I've learned about some of them through the Teach Online course.
Oh, I was just going to say,
But
you need to take this course, but you already have.
Right, but I'm hesitant with 200 plus students to introduce something that's just going to get way out of control by them to moderate it and manage it. Things like interactive discussion forums and collaborative assignments, and I'm hesitant to introduce those in such a large course. Chaos and failure, yeah, that's good.
All right, how to deal with chaos, failure, and experimentation.
And then interaction as well, introducing more. Currently the course there's zero interaction. It's, I deliver lectures, they take tests on the lectures,
And the thing that you said here about managing and moderation, or moderating it, is, I think, a good element as well. Because, and this gets to Tim's point about, even with the iPhone apps, you have the people moderating the things as well. Nobody wants to, some people like it. It's difficult to organize all of the chaos sometimes. So we try to avoid it by having things that are so simple and so non-interactive, sort of passive, just follow the directions, check all the boxes, don't cause any trouble, don't ask any questions, because if you do, somebody's got to go in and say, all right, I'm going to answer this email, and probably it's never just one email, right? There's always 100 different emails that you get about the same assignment, that you did something not as perfectly in the direction, so there's some amount of misunderstanding, they're not doing or they don't know what to do, so then you have, your day is ruined because you have to respond to all of these emails. So this idea of how do we moderate these things more effectively, and a lot of what the Active Teaching Lab is about, and I try to keep front and center, is not just, is this better for the students, because we can do stuff that's super great for the students, but it'll kill you as an instructor. And we don't want that. right? Because then leads to burnout, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we do this in a sustainable way that's not so difficult? So good, let's talk about some of these things. So on the activity sheet, we've got these 3 sections so that we're going to start to talk about at the beginning. And a lot of this is the pedagogical tips. They're all connected to the technological tips. So if you're going to empower learners to explore good problems together that reveal systems, you need to figure out how to do that within the Canvas learning management system or other interactive assignments and activities where they can talk to each other. You need to first know, and the students need to know, why are they doing this? What is the value of it? And they need to learn the feedback. They need to have feedback throughout the whole process. So they know what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. They know if they're learning or if they're going down a dead-end path. They need to be guided and corrected if they're going in the wrong direction. So all 3 of these elements are very important. So how do we do that? This line in red is my, 12 words? 10 words. 10 word summary of a PhD in curriculum instruction and learning sciences. This encapsulates a lot of the research, educational research, on what good learning is. It starts off with empowerment. We know that when students are motivated and they are guiding their own learning, that nothing will stop them. How many of you have hobbies? How many of you spend a lot of time in that hobby? How many of you spend a lot of time in that hobby despite not getting paid for it? Right? We do this because we love doing the thing that we do. In many ways, we're all in the positions that we are right now because we took a hobby, we found it, and we figured out how to get paid with it. We're probably not in the positions because somebody said, oh, you can get money in this position. It's driven first primarily from our motivations, from our intrinsic motivation rather than the intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, I mean. So motivating students, getting them to be engaged and getting them to interact with each other in many ways starts with figuring out what is it that turns them on, that hooks them, that grabs their attention, that grabs their time and energy. If you can connect your course content to that, you're in business. And you need to, at that point, actually step out of the way and let them run with it. All right, that's the empowering learners, and we can get into that a little bit more. Do you have examples of that from your courses? Can you think about ways that you let your students find a connection to the content and then take it in a way that they feel is interesting or at most applicable to the paths and their values and interests and experiences and perceived pathways?
Like the individual projects, they you have a general idea, but then you say, well, let's you pick a topic in this area, and usually they get very excited and make their PowerPoint or whatever, and that's, I think, probably if you think of, if one thinks about their own education, you always think about the projects you did, presentations, you did as a student, but that's what you remember the most.
Yeah, or generally we don't remember the problem sets, that we did over and over again, or I don't know, structuring sentences. I still remember the diagramming sentences. I guess I remember that, and that has nothing to do with an interest of mine, but I remember it because it was painful. So these are the kinds, is it joyful or is it painful? Those are what we're going to remember. How can we harness the joyful things that students find joyful? Other examples?
I have students lead class discussions. So I divide them in groups, and each group's responsible for a different day, and they're assigned a topic, and they're given background material, but they do whatever they want for, however they want to structure the discussion.
Very good. So yeah, you let them take some of that responsibility for organizing how they're going to get what they decide to do done within constraints and parameters that you need to have as an instructor. And the more that we tell them, this is what I expect of you, here are the parameters, within that, you have the freedom to do as much as you can on your own, and let me actually give you points for connecting it with your life. To think about how it works with your values. And it could be something as simple as, are you doing anything like this in other classes, even though the content is different? Can this experience help you in your other classes? That would be a win, because that Venn diagram of I've got to do this and I've got to do this, if we can have them overlap a little bit, that's a time saver for the students. And it's a time saver for you and for the other instructor too, because that's two sets of instructions that don't have to be covered as much oftentimes. So yeah, that's empowerment, the exploring the problems. We've sort of talked about that together. So there are 3 levels of learning, of active learning. There's active learning, and this is a seminal research by Mickey Chi in 2003, I think, or 2009, I don't remember exactly. She talks about active learning. Active learning is taking notes. Active learning is anything that involves some sort of kinesthetic connection to your learning is active learning. It can be very simple. It can be as simple as I'm watching the instructor move across the room. Now that's not very active learning, but it's active learning because you're doing something. The next level is constructive. Constructive learning is where we actually make something based on our learning individually. So I've learned something, now I apply it to this problem. Or I create this paper mache volcano based on what I know about things erupting from volcanoes. Better, a more visceral understanding of what something is. It's often connected to experience, but connected to an individual experience. The highest level of active learning is what she calls interactive learning. And interactive learning is working with what she calls an intelligent agent. So someday it might be artificial intelligence. Someday maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. But in the meantime, it can be with the instructor. It can be with another student. It can be with a group of students. Anybody that can provide nuanced feedback to, am I going in the right direction? Am I learning things? Am I not learning things? Now, group work, I think we all, you hear the term group work, and immediately there are some negative connotations that come up, right? Because we've all experienced group work where it's hard to organize. One or more of the members wants to go in one direction, so there's power struggles. There are people who participate and people who don't participate, and that's a headache. In figuring out all of this group work, well, first of all, figuring out how to navigate that is a professional skill in just about every discipline. So, in addition to learning the content, in some ways, putting all the content aside, it's still a good activity. You've got to learn civility, you've got to learn negotiation, you've got to learn organization, you've got to figure things out amongst each other, multiple opinions. But then you add in the content, and now you have 3, 4, 5 different people looking at the same piece of content, and you've got 3 or 4, 5 different perspectives of that content. In interacting with each other, we all see it a little bit differently. We all have our own understandings based on our own values and experiences, etc. with it, the way that we think. By having these communications about that content and working together to come up with a single assignment or project, we share that. We share our different perspectives. And so instead of just seeing it the way that John sees it, I see it the way that Jennifer sees it and the way that Colleen sees it. I don't understand it the same way, but I can see that other people see it in different ways, and I can start to pick and pull in some of the ways that people see it, and that enriches my understanding. Instead of one synapse, multiple synapses start to happen, and it deepens the learning in a really big way. So whenever we can, if we can figure out how to do this interactive learning, that's awesome. Revealing systems, and this is another part that in many ways the group projects are great. Oftentimes in group projects we experience failure, whether it's failure to negotiate, failure to figure out how to do stuff. But without failure and success within a system, you can't understand the system itself. If you follow the recipe perfectly, you don't know how to become a cook. It's only when you burn something or you add in a tablespoon instead of a teaspoon, or you add in, the wrong kind of milk and skim milk instead of whole milk, those failures lead to the understanding. And it's the same in just about every discipline that I can think of. Can you think of the experiences in your own disciplines?
The failure?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can you think of ways that you have students fail purposefully?
Well, purposely, I think it's part of the process, and I apologize, I didn't say what I taught, but I actually teach in the physical therapy program. So part of the, at the onset, we try to set up a safe environment. We say you will fail. It's part of the process.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's better to fail in the learning environment than when you're actually dealing with real people.
Correct. So, but I find it interesting that you have in here reward points for it, and I hadn't really thought about that. We certainly don't deduct for those failures in that setting. I'm not talking about like a testing or anything of that sort, but it's kind of intriguing. Is it different to reward points for failing versus not taking away points for failing?
Yeah. I don't know. What are their thoughts on that? Margaret?
Yeah, the point thing is always a question, right? Because it's an incentive for the student. You don't want to incentivize them to fail. But I think you could frame that in terms of participation and effort, and because you'd rather have them fail than not try anything.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so, and you don't want to deduct points if somebody fails. I think you're really wanting to reward their effort and keep trying. Did you use the methodology or the framework or the decision matrix that you just learned to apply to this challenge, and where were the gaps, that you need to fill in next time? I think you need to come full circle, and if they do that, certainly they get points for the participation, even if they fail. I actually had to take a science course. I know, it's a sad day, and we had this lab, and just have to understand there's like test tubes and scientific things. And I followed the instructions, just like a recipe, right? And my results weren't right. And so the professor said, "We'll do it again. There must have been like contamination or something." Okay, so I do it all over again, and I failed again. We didn't get the right results. But I tried and tried, and he knew I tried, and he gave me full credit, even though somewhere I wasn't getting it, but I was just trying so hard to get the science experiment to work. So I think the way you structure your reward system has to allow people to make mistakes, and I think that's what you're trying to say.
Well, I'm actually trying to say something more than that. If you're going to reset an elbow or something, and you hear this clicking sound that is the wrong clicking sound, you need to know that you need to recognize that that was the wrong clicking sound. That was actually, you just made it worse. Before you do damage to a real human. So how can we say, this is what failure looks like? I've experienced this before in a safe classroom environment, so that when I get to the real world, quote unquote, environment, where the stakes are much higher, I don't make that mistake. if you follow the instructions perfectly, even if you make the best cake in the world, you still aren't going to, or the best chemistry thing in the world, you're not going to know what happens if you add too much boric acid, or what happens if you do these things. You need to recognize what failure looks like in order to understand the underlying system. And I think that that's true. I can't think of a discipline where that's not true. So that's the revealing system part.
John?
Yes?
I wonder if we even, like, when we say failure, I wonder how it's perceived from a student standpoint
Yeah.
versus my standpoint. I mean, I don't even know if we have a working, same definition.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that in terms of grade, like an F is a failing grade, right? So that means anything above an F is not failure, but not necessarily success, and whether it's success or not depends on what the student perceives as success. Some students will think, I didn't get an A, I failed. Others, but even though they did really well and they learned a lot and they improved,
This is a very good point. And because failure in schools is so clearly tied to these grades, it does have different meanings, and I think that that's a really astute point. We need to decouple, and that's why I say we need to reward with points. Exploration, risk-taking, actual explore what failure looks like. Dig into the mess, the darkness of it, and see what that feels like. Because if you do that in the current system where students say, oh, that's failure, I'll get an F if I do that, they're not going to step near that puddle. They're not going to dig in, right? So that's why I think that it needs to be rewarded in order to understand that. So that, again, when the stakes are higher, they can step out of it. But yeah, that decoupling of academic A, B, C, D, F failure versus work in this problem space and understand the entire problem space, both success and failure, is a big part of it.
I was just saying that maybe this would be the topic of a future active learning lab, because I feel almost like there's an education of what is failure, and also maybe for students might be useful, because a lot of times if it's so closely associated with grades, or maybe your identity is, I'm a smart student, I'm not a failure, or something
Right.
like that, right? Whereas it sounds like people are saying it's like a test of a way to gain feedback or iterate or something like that. Yeah. So maybe it's something that warrants more. Probably you could spend out in a whole hour talking
Yes,
about it.
well, and we did. We had an active teaching lab on
Oh, you did? Okay.
A Dark and Stormy Night. Remember Snoopys Novel
Oh, right.
that he worked on? It's like the worst opening for a novel. There's a whole contest based on, can you write the worst opening line for a novel? And where you get to win if you can write a really bad first sentence. In all disciplines, I don't know if it works in all disciplines. It's not a thing that I've seen or heard a lot of, but I know that, for example, John Pfotenhauer in thermodynamics had for many years his simulation where students could design a submarine. And they had to design components of that submarine, and then they would try it out, and it would blow up spectacularly if it didn't work. And then they figure out, was it the component? Was it the length of the component? Was it the material? What were the parts of it that made it fail? So failure was built into the class. They would try over and over and over again and reflect on, well, why did it blow up this time? Why did it blow up this time? And then when it finally did work, they were like, this is amazing. And they could see the different elements, stress factors, cost, all of these different elements that played into that. So they understood how the pieces interacted with each other. I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do with, as far as failure is concerned.
Is reflection a big part of that? So when I'm thinking of like all the times I've gotten to fail in physical therapy, I mean, I don't love it all the time, but I really like failing in a higher stakes scenario, because then I know I will never forget that thing. So if you just build in maybe not everyone sees it it that way. So if you can build in like a little reflection after an activity or a practical that says, well, what did you learn from this, or how are you better off now having messed up on that than before? It would help make that more salient.
Absolutely, you need to have the reflection built in, and I think I'll talk a little bit more about reflective practices in this slide. But yeah, because if you fail and you don't reflect on it, or it's just a willy-nilly thing and you don't think about it, then yeah, that's not worth anything. Outcomes. As you think of your course outcomes, as you think of your learning outcomes for individual activities, there are things that you, as the instructor, say, my students should do this because it's important for them. Are those written in such a way that the students can see themselves grabbing onto and owning those outcomes as well? So are you saying they need to, I'm not even going to go with the forestry management, I don't know enough about it. They need to understand, give me an outcome. Somebody give me an outcome.
How about like playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something?
Okay, excellent. By the end of this course, they will learn how to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. As a student, why do I want to do that?
Like it's for fun, maybe.
Maybe it's for fun, and so I could grab onto that. Maybe I have a younger cousin or brother or sister that I'd like to play it for, so I could see myself doing that. Is there some other, how about by the end of the course, the students will be able to play a simple chorded song or song with chords in it. Now they can say, oh, I'm going to play Happy Birthday for my brother, I'm going to play this other thing for my church, I'm going to play this other thing, and now they've got a broader range of choices that they can say, this is important to me. Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, not so important. It covers all the bases that I need to know to move on to the next level, but it might not necessarily be good enough,
Right.
Attractive enough. And there's an interesting thing. So in Suzuki Piano, the first book has all of the things that they need as a foundational level that then they can go on and often take book 2 and so on that builds off of this in a way. But it also sets a foundation for them to be able to take and start doing things on their own. And to be able to see that as a student, that eventually I need to get to this point, and this outcome will help me get on the path that I want to get. If they don't make that connection, then they're doing the work for you and not for them. And it's your outcome, it's not owned by them. The learning is not owned by them. So can you make them broad enough so that the students get in and find their own versions of the outcomes? Actually have them say, what are your outcomes? Or what are your versions of the outcomes for this course? Can you build in reflection at every activity even to say, what did you learn in this activity? How might this connect to the outcomes that you have? So that again, they're reminded, I'm doing this because I want to achieve X, Y, and Z, rather than because my instructor assigned X, Y, and Z. And then the final one is iteration. You won't do it well the first time. Your goals won't, or your outcomes won't be broad enough. The reflective practices probably won't achieve what you want them to achieve. Ask your students. We get feedback from student evals once a semester officially. And then it's usually too late to make any changes in that semester. If you ask for feedback every assignment, you can teach responsively. You can say, oh, everybody hates doing this kind of a thing. Let's not do it anymore. I hate to grade it too. Let's do something else and introduce that something else. And it might be easier for you. It might be easier for them. It might be more responsive for everybody. But you often don't know until the end of the semester when you get the evaluations back and somebody complains about it, but many won't. But if you add it into the assignment themselves to talk about what worked in this assignment, what didn't work in this assignment, what have you learned, what do you wish you could still learn? If you ask them that, you can be responsive. And they will also, if you're responsive, they will feel like you care for them. The number one indicator of student success, according to multiple studies and most significantly the University of Central Florida for an online course, for their online courses, is students succeed when they are able to answer the question, my instructor shows that they care for my learning. If you can build that in, that's amazing. One way to build that in is to ask them, is this working for you? What's working, what's not working? As a bonus, it also helps them think back on what they did, which is another iteration, another connection with the content. So distributed learning is every time that you connect back to that original content, those learning synapses and such become deeper and deeper. So can you do that? And then the final one is feedback. Do the students know if they understand it? Do they know why they got it wrong? Do they know if they got it wrong? A lot of our quizzes, they don't, right? We don't say, we say, oh, you got the answer wrong. You chose B, but it's not B. But we don't say, the actual answer is A, because when they take the test, you can test them, get some summative assessment for them. That is, you are checking to see how well they know that to be able to give them a grade. You can also add informative feedback. Informative feedback says, you got this wrong and here's why. And that becomes a learning opportunity. It's feedback to help them redirect their thinking on it and learn what the right answer is. So, first opportunity, the reading before the class. They didn't get it. Oh well. Second opportunity, in class, I repeated in the lecture. They should definitely have it now, right? No, they didn't get it. Third opportunity, they take the test. They still didn't get it. Darn, what do I do now? Fourth opportunity, they get feedback immediately when they were tested, saying, nope, you got that wrong. Here's the right answer, and here's why. That's 4 different times that they have the opportunity to understand that information. So again, it's that distributed practice. It's the right answer because, and it's the right answer. Yes, you got this right. Insert another, this happens because of this. You understood that. Great. That helps it. Another way to get feedback, those peer assignments, those group assignments, when students are able to talk with each other and say, oh, that's interesting, Tim, that you see it that way because I see it this other way. Now Tim understands how I see it, and he says, maybe I see it wrong. Maybe I see it right. Does the way that I see it work in the same way? Or Colleen sees it a third different way. Now we have to negotiate and figure out which of us is right, or is it something that neither one of the 3 of us can see. Every time you set up peer feedback, that's a little bit less feedback that you have to give. So it makes your life a lot easier. It's not all the feedback, because oftentimes students will lead each other down wrong paths, and it's important for you to be able to swoop in and save them. So figure out ways to intervene in that situation. But many times they can pick up 90% of what the feedback that you should give. In Canvas you can do this, and we've got instructions on how to do this on the activity sheet and resources for that. You can give feedback for their papers, but oftentimes unless you tell them, they won't know where to look for it. And oftentimes, how many of you have graded papers, given great feedback, and the students don't even pick it up at the end of the semester? You've done all of this work and they don't look at it.
More often than not.
More often than not, right. And you look at that pile of ungrabbed research papers and you say, why did I even bother to spend all this time into it? If you build in, 1, do you see this? 2, how are you addressing it? And I'm going to give you points for answering that. Because it's worth a point or 2, they will answer that, and that means that they will look at the feedback that you've spent time doing. If you have drafts, give them that feedback early on and say, show me how you're addressing it in the next draft. So you can build on, and it becomes a scaffolded assignment where what they learn in the first draft and your feedback, they need to apply in the next draft. Whether it's your feedback or peer feedback.
So that's something that's built into the speed grader? I mean, you can, because I use this speed grader for giving them feedback.
Yep.
And then, you know, they can reply to it, but is there a way to make that reply itself a graded assignment to
Not within, no, you cannot have the reply in as that assignment. It has to be a separate assignment.
but you can
You can say, based on the feedback that I gave you in your first draft of the paper for assignment number 2, I want you to take that feedback and show me your second draft and tell me how you implemented the feedback that I gave you, or whether you chose not to and why. Which gets to the self-reflective. If you're going to ask them whether they, you don't have to do it, but tell me why, at least you're getting them to think back about why they made the choices that they did. What did you notice as you do this? One of the things that we've done even in the active teaching lab is we've changed this to a reflection paper. It's kind of, there's an activity called the muddiest point. A great way to get feedback is, you know, hand out Post-it notes or 3x5 cards, and on your way out, you just, you know, write down, is there anything that you didn't get today? Write it down, and on your way out, leave it on the door as you exit. And then as an instructor, you can pick those up and reflect back on, did they get what I wanted them to get? What can I do differently? What should I revisit tomorrow that 7 of those Post-it notes said that they didn't get? Those are all things that, one, it's good for you because you're getting feedback on the assignment. 2, it's good for them because it forces them to think back about what they learned and what they didn't learn, so they don't just leave without ever revisiting the material again. They have to at least think about it one time. So that's it for the pedagogical stuff. And I want to spend a little bit of time on, well, one, just sort of answering any questions that you might have, and then digging into some of the technology elements of it. And sort of as a disclaimer, we can't answer all of the technology elements in this session, but if there are some top questions that you have, we can dig into it for sure.
I think the biggest thing I struggle with on the more interactive with the course is just kind of what you said at the beginning. Like, you can do some really great things in your course, but you could spend hours grading it or hours.
Yeah.
So it's trying to figure out that balance.
So one of the things that sort of one of my hero teachers here on campus is Morton Gernsbacher, and she has a fully online class, 150 students. The students do 5 assignments a week that she grades. She grades all of those 5 assignments for all of those 150 students. The way she is able to do that is it's a lot of reflection. It's a lot of show me an example from the internet of whatever the content was that we're talking about. And then she just gives them, I don't remember if she's on 3 points or the 5-point system. She's gone back and forth between the 2. But 1, they did the basic. 2, this is a nice amount. Or 3, this is a really good level of what they did. So you can look at it, and then it's just 1, 2, 3. And they get that very base amount of feedback. Because there are 5 assignments in a week for the entire class, each assignment is very, very low stakes. So if they completely fail one assignment, it's not that big of a deal. They're getting constant, small, low stake direction and revision and redirection based on that. That's a lot of feedback on things. She will have the students also do a lot of interactive stuff where they meet up in a group and they talk back and forth with each other. Those two, she's relying on the students to be able to give each other a lot of feedback in that. So it's interactive, they're able to share back and forth with each other. She just goes in and says, did they share a lot or not? 1, 2, 3, or 1 through 5. So those are both ways that she's figured out to make it less work, but it does take structural design in the beginning to like set those up. And if it fails, if it's chaotic, that's okay too, because there are so many of them. It's it's one-off. You didn't ruin anyone's class. If you only designed one assignment for 100% of their grade and it was a bad assignment, you feel a lot of guilt and you've ruined some people's entire class. If you've got 16 assignments, 20 assignments, and one of them is really bad, it's not that big of a deal. It won't affect anybody's grade, and you can just wipe it out. If you just have the one and you take that away, you've got nothing to grade them on. So there's something about that. Lots of low stakes assignments that is a very easy way to experiment that's in low stakes. And it lets you as an instructor experience failure as well as success in a way that's easily navigable. The other thing that I would say for that is ask your students. Again, your students are in 3 or 4 other classes each semester. They've been in dozens of classes throughout the last few years probably. They have seen a lot more classes than you have. You've seen a lot more classes than we have. You've seen what works, what doesn't work for you. So N of 1, but still, if we ask our students, they can say, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. And if enough of them say this works for me, here's an example from this other class that I took, you can say, oh, that's a good idea, I'll try that. Does that help at all?
Mm-hmm. I think it's just trying to figure out those strategies. And the speed grader is a really good point, because I've given lots of great feedback and didn't tell them to check it. They had no idea. I just assumed it would pop up.
Yeah.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't. No, you've got to know where to click, and you've got to be motivated to go click on that as a student, to care.
Right.
One of the
Go
ahead.
Yeah.
I had that totally happen to me because I think my professor gave me comments within a Word document, but after I submitted it, and then I would think that I'm a pretty good student, but I just really didn't realize I have to actually download this thing and then open it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like maybe now students might be really used to the information being very visible or something.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned in the activity sheet is Kurt Cooney's given an active teaching lab on audio feedback. So what he does is he takes his phone, microphone recording, and he goes through the paper and he says, hey, so-and-so, I like what you did here in your opening paragraph, da-da-da-da-da-da. In the second paragraph, your main point is da-da-da-da. Third paragraph, here on page 2, you've got this going on. I really like that. You could use a little bit more work on da-da-da-da-da. And the whole thing takes 3 minutes. Save, upload to the speed grader, and now the students, as they go, it's basically like having a little mini conference with the students. He doesn't have any handwriting cramping. He doesn't have the non-verbal nightmare of text only responses that can be very threatening to students, right? If you say, this is bad, they're like, this is bad. You can interpret that in all kinds of ways. If you hear them say, can be thought of a little bit differently, or consider this other thing, you've got the voice inflections all in there that adds more information than shows up in the text. I really thought that was a nice way to do that. And it's a little bit more like a conversation than the act of having to write feedback on grades. And it slows the students down in looking at that feedback. So they can't just scan through, skip, because they have to follow it at the speed of your voice before they get to paragraph 2 or page 3 on their paper. I thought that was a really brilliant way to humanize yourself with the students as well. Any last questions before we are out? We didn't really have a lot of time to talk about the tech stuff. There is technical training for Canvas if you are interested in that. Cliff Cunningham leads several things. They're on the faculty engagement site on our calendar. So if you have questions on how to do some of these things, that is all available there as well. If there are no other questions, thank you for coming, and on your way out, you can check a few boxes and drop this off at the table in the top basket here. And that would be fantastic.
Where do you find out more about technical training?
On the faculty on the AT website. So the same place that you went to register, at.wisc.edu.
AT for active teaching?
For academic technology.
Okay.
Oh, it's at.doit.wisc.edu. I should know this. It's been that for 7 years. But we have a calendar of upcoming events, and then on the side here, even more, and that gives us a whole calendar full of events. So Monday, he's got getting started with Canvas. Tuesday, file management in Canvas. Next Wednesday, managing grades in Canvas. And then he's got a tips and tricks and open office hours. So if you come with your own personal questions about Canvas and you don't see them covered in these curriculum, you can go say, hey, I've got this thing about how do I do this in SpeedGrader? And they'll be able to help you out. It's this next week and the week after.
Does that go on throughout the summer?
It does not go, I think it goes on throughout the summer, but not in,
Not as many.
yeah. So yeah, here in June, there's Canvas office hours twice. July, they've just got one. Right before the semester starts in August, I know that week before there will be a few more of those. So this is actually really good if you're redesigning your class during the summer. You can work on stuff on your own, and if you get stuck, go to the next office hours, get unstuck, go back and work on it on your own. All right, thanks for coming.
Thanks, John.